The quiet guest room sparkled with golden lights. Soft music floated in the air, and people wore suits so sharp you could almost feel them cut through the silence. It was a grand party at a luxury hotel in San Francisco, hosted by a powerful tech investor. Everyone was here. Startup founders, famous CEOs, venture capitalists with million-dollar smiles. The air smelled of expensive perfume, ambition, and just a little fear. Everyone wanted to impress everyone else. Then Sundar walked in. He wore a simple gray sweater. Not even a new one. The cuffs were slightly worn, and the color had faded. A little at the shoulders. His jeans were plain, his sneakers white but not shining. He walked softly, almost as if he was afraid to disturb the carpet under his feet. He didn't carry a glass of wine. He didn't laugh loudly. He didn't check his phone to pretend he was busy. He simply stood there, by the corner of the room, quietly looking at everyone else. At first, no one noticed him. But then someone did. A young man in a black tuxedo, hair slicked back, noticed the sweater. He frowned, whispered something to his friend, and they both turned to stare at Sundar. They smirked, their eyes full of unspoken judgment. One of them shook his head, as if he had seen something dirty in a clean place. A waiter walked by and accidentally bumped Sundar's shoulder. The glass on the tray wobbled dangerously. Sundar quickly caught the glass before it fell, smiled gently, and handed it back. The waiter looked at him and muttered, "Thank you, sir," but then rushed away, embarrassed. A woman in a red dress came up to Sundar. Her eyes were bright and sharp, like diamonds that had learned to cut people. She looked him up and down. "Are you lost?" she asked. Sundar shook his head. "No," he said simply. "Are you with catering?" She continued, her tone more curious than cruel. "No," he said again. She raised her eyebrows, gave a little laugh, not kind, not mean, just confused, and walked away. Within a few minutes, whispers started to travel across the room. "Who let him in? He's not on the guest list, is he? Look at those shoes." One man, clearly the host, finally approached Sundar. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his suit worth more than most cars. He had a practiced smile that could freeze or melt depending on his mood. Right now it was cold. "Excuse me," the host said. "May I help you?" "I'm afraid this is a private event." Sundar looked into the man's eyes, calm, unafraid. "I was invited," he replied. "Are you sure?" The host pressed, already motioning to security standing by the doors. Sundar nodded, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small, folded card. The host snatched it, read it, and frowned. It was indeed an invitation, his own signature at the bottom. But still, the host said, "Well, we have a dress code, you see. We want everyone here to look their best." "I'm afraid you don't." Hit the standard. The room had grown quiet. People were watching. Sundar felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. He could feel the judgment. Some of them looked sorry. Some of them looked amused. Most of them looked bored, waiting to see what would happen. Could feel his throat tighten. He thought about leaving. He thought about saying nothing. But something inside him, something small but unbreakable, whispered no. Not yet. He took a breath and said softly, "I see." "Would you like me to leave?" The host's smile faltered for a moment. Perhaps he expected anger or shame or excuses. But Sundar only stood there, quiet and steady. The host cleared his throat. "Yes, please." And so Sundar turned quietly and began walking toward the door. His sweater seemed even grayer now under the glittering lights. His footsteps almost silent. The party resumed its hum of voices, glasses clinking, laughter, but softer, more awkward now. As he reached the door, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned. It was the young man in the black tuxedo, the one who had smirked earlier, but now his face had changed. His smile was nervous. He said, "Wait, you're Sundar Pichai, aren't you?" The room fell silent again. Someone gasped. The host's face drained of color. Sundar didn't answer. He simply looked at the young man with the kind of calm that could only come from someone who had weathered much worse. The young man's hand dropped away. He stepped back. "Oh," he said softly. Oh no. The host rushed forward, his voice suddenly too loud and too sweet. Mr. Pichai, I didn't realize, please, come back in, sir. But Sundar only looked at him and said nothing, and then, before anyone else could speak, a loud crash came from the other side of the room. A tray of glasses shattered, wine spilling everywhere. And through the door came a figure no one expected to see, someone who would change the entire night. And everyone in it, asterisk the unexpected guest, the sound of glass shattering rang through the room like a sudden crack of thunder. People froze, conversations cut mid-sentence, laughter died in the air. All heads turned toward the source of the noise. Near the grand entrance, where Sundar still stood half-turned toward the door, waiter stood helplessly over a silver tray lying upside down, shards of crystal scattered across the polished floor. Deep red wine spread out like a dark stain on a white canvas, creeping across the marble in uneven fingers. But the eyes of the guests didn't stay on the waiter for long, because someone else was standing just beyond the doorway. And she didn't belong to this party either. She was not dressed like the others. She wore no shimmering gown, no diamonds at her throat. Instead, she wore a simple black coat that looked several winters old, her hair pulled back in a way that seemed more practical than fashionable. Her shoes were flat, the soles dull and worn. Her hands clutched a small leather bag pressed close to her chest, and her eye, wide, dark, and full of something that no one could name right away, darted quickly around the room as though she was searching for someone and trying not to be seen at the same time. A murmur rippled through the crowd. She did not seem afraid of the silence she had caused. Instead, she stepped forward, slowly but steadily, and her gaze finally landed on Sundar. She stopped there, staring directly at him. Sundar felt his breath catch for just a moment. Something about her presence pulled at him in a way he couldn't explain. He didn't recognize her, and yet she felt familiar. Not her face. He was certain he had never seen her before, but the way she stood there, uninvited, unwelcome, yet entirely unwilling to leave. The host, still recovering from his earlier mistake with Sundar, quickly stepped between her and the guests. His perfect smile slipped into something sharper as he addressed her in a low but firm voice. Madam, this is a private event, he said. If you need assistance, I can have someone help you at the front desk. But she ignored him completely. She kept her eyes fixed on Sundar, as if the two of them were the only people in the room. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but strong enough to reach his ears. You shouldn't go, she said. Not yet, the host blinked. Others exchanged confused glances. Sundar's brow furrowed, and for the first time since he walked into this room, he felt something shift inside him. Her words hung in the air, heavy and strange. Excuse me? He asked. She took another step closer. The guests parted slightly as she moved, some stepping back as though afraid to touch her coat. The room was silent, but for the faint click of her shoes on marble. They don't know who you are, she said softly. But I do. The host let out a short, incredulous laugh. What is this? He demanded. Who are you? How did you even get in here? At that, she finally glanced at him, her eyes flashing with something sharp. You've already made one mistake tonight, she told him. Don't make another. The host's face flushed red, and he gestured for the two security guards to approach. They started forward, but Sundar held up a hand, stopping them in their tracks. It's all right, he said quietly. I'd like to hear what she has to say. The host opened his mouth to protest, but the weight of Sundar's calm gaze stopped him. Reluctantly, he stepped aside. The guards hesitated, then retreated back to the door. The woman took another step closer. Now she stood only a few feet away from Sundar. Up close, he could see that her coat was dusted with faint traces of snow, and her hands, clutching the leather bag, were pale and trembling just slightly. You don't remember me, she said, her voice lower now, meant just for him, but I remember you. Sundar shook his head gently. I'm sorry, he replied. I don't think we've met. A small, sad smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. No, she agreed. We haven't, but I saw you once, years ago. You were walking down the street in Mumbai. It was raining. You stopped under a broken awning to share it with a boy who didn't even have shoes. She took a breath before continuing. That boy was my brother. Sundar felt something in his chest tighten. Fragments of memories flickered, rain on. His face, a cracked awning over his head, a barefoot boy who looked up at him with wide, grateful eyes. He hadn't thought of that day in years. You give him your umbrella, she said. And when he said he had no shoes, you gave him yours. The guests around them were still now, caught in a strange spell of her story. Some of them looked skeptical, others moved by something they couldn't quite name. My brother never forgot that day, she said. Neither did I, and when I heard your name on the news, I knew who you were. Sundar studied her face, searching for the boy he remembered. Where is he now? He asked softly. Her smile faltered then, and she looked down. Gone, she whispered. He didn't make it. But he died believing there were good people in the world. A hush fell over the room, deeper now. Sundar could feel every pair of eyes on him, but for the first time, he didn't care. He only saw her. Why are you here tonight? He asked Dot. She looked up at him again, her eyes shining but unbroken. To remind you, she said. Don't let them shame you for being simple. You wore your kindness like you wore your sweater, quiet, unassuming, but it's worth more than all their gold. Behind them, the host cleared his throat awkwardly. Look, he said, his voice strained. This is touching, but you really do need to leave now. Both of you. Sundar turned slowly to face him. His expression was calm, but there was something behind his eyes now, a strength that no one in the room had noticed before. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the doors at the far end of the room burst open with a sudden force. This time it wasn't just one figure. It was several dotted group of men and women in dark suits, earpieces visible, moved quickly into the room. Their presence was sharp and commanding, and their eyes scanned every corner with practiced precision. At the center of them was a tall woman. In a navy suit, her expression unreadable, her stride fast and purposeful. The guests gasped and shuffled back. Whispering among themselves, the woman in the navy suit stopped a few feet from Sundar and spoke in a low, clear voice. Sir, she said, we need you to come with us. It's urgent. Sundar looked at her, calmly, though his mind was already racing. What's happened? He asked Dot. She hesitated only a second before replying. There's been an incident, she said, at the headquarters. They need you immediately. Sundar glanced back at the woman in the black coat. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between fear and resolve. What kind of incident? Sundar asked again. The woman in the navy suit met his eyes. Someone broke in, she said. They were looking. Priyu? The room erupted in murmurs, shock and confusion, mixing with curiosity. Sundar straightened his shoulders, his hands still calm at his sides. All right, he said quietly. I'll come. But just as he began to move, the woman in the black coat reached out and grabbed his arm. Her grip was tight, desperate. Don't go, she whispered. It's a trap. The words fell like stones into the silence of the room. Everyone froze again, all eyes on them. Sundar stared at her, her fingers digging into his sleeve, her eyes burning with something fierce and terrified. What do you mean? He asked, his voice steady but low. She swallowed hard, glanced at the agents in dark suits, then back at him. They're not here to protect you, she said, her voice breaking slightly. They're here to take you. The room seemed to grow, colder all at once. Sundar didn't move, didn't speak. The air between them thickened with something unspoken and dangerous. And then the woman in the navy suit spoke again, louder this time, sharper. Sir, she said firmly, come with us now. Sundar looked at her, then at the woman in the black coat, and then at the silent, watching crowd around them. His heart pounded once, hard, and he had to choose, asterisk the choice for what felt like an eternity. Sundar stood in the center of the grand room, caught between two forces pulling him in opposite directions. The woman in the navy suit stood rigid just a few feet away, her expression cold but controlled, her eyes watching his every move. Behind her, the other agents spread out slightly, creating a subtle wall between him and the door. Each of them stood like a silent question mark, unreadable, uncheckable dot. Then there was the woman in the black coat, her hand still clinging tightly to his sleeve, her eyes wide and pleading. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so slight. Her breath was uneven, and Sundar could feel the faint tremor in her fingers. Her words still hung heavy in the air between them. They're not here to protect you. They're here to take you. The other guests in the room had formed a loose circle around them now. No one dared to step closer, but no one dared to look away either. Some whispered quietly behind their hands, their voices barely audible over the low hum of the heating vents. Others simply stared, their faces pale and uncertain, caught between fear of the agents and curiosity about the drama unfolding before them. Sundar closed his eyes for just a moment, trying to calm the noise in his mind. He thought of the boy, in the rain so many years ago, of the countless times he had chosen to stay quiet when others shouted, to listen when others demanded. And he thought of this woman, a stranger and yet not, her voice breaking as she warned him, when he opened his eyes. He spoke softly, but his words carried through the silence of the room. "What happens if I go with you?" he asked. The woman in the navy suit got her jaw tightened just slightly. She glanced at the agents behind her, then back at him. "We'll explain everything on the way," she replied evenly. "But you need to come now. Time is critical." The woman in the black coat shook her head quickly, her hair slipping loose from its tie. "Don't believe her," she whispered. "Once you leave this room with him, no one will see you again." Sundar studied the woman in the navy suit carefully. Her face betrayed nothing. No fear, no malice, no sympathy, only a professional. Stillness. He turned slightly to look at the agents. None of them moved. None of them even blinked. Then he looked down at the hand on his sleeve. Fragile, but firm. And he saw something in her eyes that he could not ignore. Desperation, yes. Fear, yes. But also something stronger, deeper, determination that told him she believed every word she was saying. He slowly placed his other hand over hers, steadying it. "If not them," he said quietly to her, "then who? Where do I go?" She swallowed, her lips pressing together for a moment as though she was afraid to say what came next. "With me," she said finally. "If you trust me?" The host, who had remained silent for much of this exchange, now stepped forward, trying to reclaim some semblance of control over his party. His voice trembled slightly despite his attempt at authority. "All right, that's enough," he said. "Both of you, and whoever these people are, please resolve this elsewhere. You're disrupting the event." The woman in the black coat shot him a look so sharp, he actually took half a step back. "This isn't your party anymore," she said, her voice low but firm. For the first time, Sundar saw uncertainty flicker across the host's polished face. He raised his hand slightly in surrender, choosing silence over another rebuke. Sundar turned back to the woman in the navy suit. "I need an answer," he said. "Why should I trust you?" Her gaze hardened just a fraction. "Because we're the only ones who can keep you safe," she replied. But the woman in the black coat spoke almost at the same time, her words cutting over the agents, "because they're the ones you need protection from." She insisted that the two women stared at each other now, their silent battle filling the room with an invisible tension that pressed on everyone's chest. Sundar closed his eyes again, exhaling slowly. When he opened them, he made his choice. He stepped toward the woman in the black coat. The room gasped softly as one, like a single breath drawn in surprise. The agents tensed, their hands twitching as though waiting for an order. The woman in the navy suit's lips tightened into a thin line, and for just a second, Sundar thought he saw the faintest flicker of anger behind her calm eyes. "Very well," she said at last, her tone even but colder now. "You've made your decision." She motioned to her team, and they began to retreat toward the door. But just as they reached it, she stopped and turned her head slightly. "This is not over," she added, her voice low and deliberate. Then she and her team vanished into the hallway, the heavy doors closing behind them with a soft but final thud. The room remained silent, all eyes now on Sundar and the woman beside him. Her hand finally released his sleeve, but she stayed close, her breath still quick and shallow. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" Sundar asked gently. "For trusting me," she replied. He gave her a small, quiet smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Now what?" he asked. She glanced at the crowd, then back at him, and lowered her voice. "Now we get out of here, before they come back." He nodded. The two of them began to move toward a smaller door at this side of the room, unnoticed until now. The host opened his mouth as though to stop them, but thought better of it when Sundar's eyes met his. The other guests stepped aside without a word, some averting their gaze entirely. A few watched them with something close to admiration, or perhaps envy. When they slipped through the side door, they found themselves in a quiet, dimly lit hallway lined with mirrors. Their footsteps echoed softly as they walked quickly, but not quite running. She led him through twists and turns he didn't recognize, always glancing back to make sure he kept up. Finally, she stopped in front of an unmarked door and pulled out a small key from her coat pocket, pushed it open, and motioned for him to enter. Inside was a narrow stairwell that spiraled downward, lit only by a single bare bulb. The air was cooler here and faintly smelled of stone and dust. She followed him in, closing the door softly behind them. "Where does this lead?" Sundar asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she started down the stairs and he followed her. The sound of their shoes against the steps was the only thing breaking the silence. "You still don't trust me," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "Should I?" he asked. She paused, just for a second, then continued down. "You already chose me," she said. "That's enough for now." They descended for what felt like forever. The stairs narrowed, the air grew colder, and Sundar could feel his pulse beating louder in his ears. At last, they reached a heavy metal door at the bottom. She pulled another key from her pocket, this one older, scratched and unlocked it. The hinges groaned as she pushed it open. Beyond the door was a long tunnel, lined with old brick and dim lights spaced far apart. It stretched out into darkness. She stepped inside and he followed. "What is this place?" Sundar asked. She glanced at him over her shoulder, her eyes dark but unreadable. "A way out," she said. They walked in silence for several minutes, the walls closing in slightly as the tunnel curved. Sundar's mind raced with questions, but he stayed quiet, sensing she would speak when she was ready. Finally, they reached another door, this one wooden, with peeling paint. She stopped and turned to face him fully. "Now, when we go through this door," she said, her voice low and deliberate, "everything changes. You won't be able to go back to who you were before tonight." He searched her eyes for some hint of what waited beyond. "And if I don't go through?" he asked. Her lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Then they'll find you," she said simply. "And that will be the end of your story." He studied the door for a long moment. Then he placed his hand on the worn wood, feeling its rough surface under his palm. "What's behind it?" he asked softly. Her answer was just as soft, but her words sent a chill down his spine. "The truth," she said, "and the people who've been waiting for you." He took a deep breath. Then, slowly, he began to push the door open, and just before the gap grew wide enough to see, a sudden noise, sharp, metallic, rang out behind them. They both froze. The tunnel behind them was no longer empty. Dark shapes moved in the distance, fast, silent, their footsteps echoing closer. She grabbed his arm again, her eyes urgent. "Hurry," she whispered, "before they catch us." And then the lights above them flickered, and the door in front of them swung all the way open. What Sundar saw on the other side stopped him cold. Asterisk the truth when the door swung open. The faint light from the tunnel spilled into the space beyond, and revealed something Sundar could not have imagined. It was not another corridor, not a hidden exit, not even a secret room in the hotel. It was something much stranger and much larger. Beyond the doorway stretched what appeared to be an underground chamber, wide and long, its ceiling lost in darkness above. The walls glowed faintly with soft golden panels, each etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when you looked too long. Faint humming filled the air, steady and low, as though the walls themselves were alive. In the center of the chamber stood a table made of glass or something like it, but with an iridescent sheen that shimmered between colors every time Sundar blinked. Scattered around the table were a dozen people, men and women, all of them dressed plainly, but their eyes sharp and watchful. They all turned at once when Sundar and the woman in the black coat stepped inside. The woman released his arm and walked forward calmly, her coat swaying gently with each step. She stopped near the table and placed her leather bag on its surface, her hands lingering on it for just a moment as though it contained something precious, thought one of the figures. An older man with silver hair and a quiet dignity spoke first. His voice was deep and warm, but carried an edge of urgency. "You brought him," he said, his eyes never leaving Sundar. "He chose," the woman replied simply, glancing back at Sundar as if to remind him that he had indeed made his choice. The man nodded slowly, then gestured toward a chair on the far side of the table. "Sit," he said. "We have much to tell you." Sundar hesitated, his eyes sweeping the room, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Nothing about this place fit into the world he knew. It was too deliberate to be accidental, too strange to be familiar, but it also felt, and he couldn't explain why, inevitable. As though some part of him had always been heading toward this room. He crossed the chamber slowly, his footsteps echoing faintly against the golden walls. When he sat, the surface of the chair adjusted subtly to his weight, almost as if it molded itself to him. The sensation was unsettling, but not uncomfortable. The older man leaned forward, resting his hands lightly on the strange glass table. "You must have many questions," he began, "and we will answer them all. But first, you should know why you're here." Sundar met his gaze evenly. "Then tell me," he said quietly. The man nodded, as though he had been waiting for those words. "What you experienced upstairs," he said, "was not a mistake. It was a test. We needed to see if you still remembered who you were before they got to you." Sundar frowned slightly, feeling a flicker of anger. "Before who got to me?" "Yes," the man's eyes darkened. "Yes, slightly." "The ones who sent the agents," he said. "The ones who pretend to protect you." The woman in the black coat spoke now, stepping closer to the table. "They've been watching you for years," she said, "ever since you began rising. Through the ranks, waiting for the moment you stopped being useful." "And when is that moment?" Sundar asked. "When you start asking the wrong questions," she replied. "Or when you remember too much." The older man reached into his pocket and withdrew a small device, no larger than a coin, and placed it on the table in front of Sundar. It glowed faintly, a soft blue light pulsing from its center. "This," the man said, "was found in your office 2 nights ago." Sundar leaned closer, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" "A tracker," the man replied, "and more. It listens, records, reports. It has been with you for months." Sundar felt a chill run through him. He thought back to every meeting, every private conversation, every quiet moment when he believed he was alone. All of it, possibly heard, recorded, catalogued. Who planted it? He asked softly. The woman answered without hesitation. "The same people you almost left with tonight." He stared at the tiny device for a long moment, his mind churning. "Why?" he finally asked. "Because," the man said, his voice heavy now, "you hold something they cannot allow you to share. Something you may not even know you carry." Sundar looked up sharply. "What do I carry?" The woman in the black coat opened her leather bag slowly and removed a folder, thick and worn, filled with papers that looked as though they had been handled many times before. She laid it flat on the table and opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Some he recognized immediately, himself at company events, at airports, walking to meetings. Others were older, grainier, of him as a young man, as a boy, even. And then, as she flipped further, The photographs became stranger. Pictures of meetings he didn't remember attending. Conversations he didn't recall having. Signatures on documents he didn't recognize. What is this? He demanded Datta. Woman's eyes softened, though her voice remained firm. It's your life, she said. The parts you were made to forget. The older man leaned closer now, his voice dropping to a near whisper. There are truths hidden in your memory, he said. Truths about them and about yourself. Sundar's hands tightened slightly on the table's edge. He felt a rising confusion, anger, fear, all tangled together. If this is true, he said slowly, why not tell me earlier? Why wait until now? The woman closed the folder gently and met his gaze. Because, she said, tonight was the first time you made a choice. The first time you chose yourself. Sundar leaned back in the chair, trying to breathe evenly, trying to calm the storm of thoughts in his head. But before he could speak again, a sudden low tone filled the chamber, a sound like a bell, but deeper, more insistent. The people around the table immediately stiffened. The older man straightened, his face grim. They found us. He said simply. The lights on the walls dimmed slightly, and the golden glow shifted to a more urgent amber. The humming in the air grew louder, sharper. The woman moved quickly now, her movements precise and practiced. She gathered the photographs, slipped them back into the folder, and shoved it into her bag. We don't have much time, she said, already moving toward another door at the far end of the chamber. One Sundar hadn't noticed before. Wait, Sundar called after her, standing now. What happens if they catch us? She paused at the door and looked back at him, her eyes darker than he had ever seen them. Then you'll never know the truth, she said quietly, and neither will anyone else. Without another word, she pushed open the door and slipped through. The others began to follow, one by one, their faces set and silent. Sundar hesitated, glancing back at the chamber, the strange walls, the glowing table, the photographs he still didn't understand. And then he heard it, the distant sound of footsteps echoing through the tunnels behind them. Not slow, not cautious, fast, coming closer. He turned and ran toward the door. On the other side, another stairwell stretched upward this time, narrow and steep. He climbed quickly, his breath harsh in his chest. The others ahead of him moving like shadows. When they finally reached the top, they emerged into another hallway, plain and unremarkable. The woman was waiting for him, her hand already on the handle of a door marked exit. She looked at him one last time before pushing it open. Beyond the door was not the city. It was not the hotel. It was somewhere else. An open field stretched before him, silver under a full moon, surrounded by dark hills. In the distance, faint lights flickered, not street lights, but something stranger, colder, moving in patterns he couldn't quite understand. The air here was crisp and smelled of earth and wind. He stepped out slowly, the grass soft beneath his feet. The woman moved ahead of him, walking toward the flickering lights. The others followed her, silent as ghosts, and behind him, somewhere, far below in the tunnels, he heard the echo of doors slamming open, voices shouting. Footsteps climbing, but ahead of him, under the moonlight, the woman stopped and turned back toward him. This is your last chance, she called softly. Come with us and see the truth. Or stay and let them decide who you are. Sundar stood there, the cold air sharp in his lungs, his heart hammering. Behind him, the life he thought he knew. Before him, the unknown. He had to choose. Again, and then, just as he stepped forward, the ground beneath him shuddered violently. As though the earth itself was waking up, he stumbled, looked down, and saw a faint crack opening in the grass at his feet, glowing with the same strange golden light from the chamber. And then, before he could react, the ground gave way entirely, and he fell, the fell at first. There was no sound, only the rushing of air and the cold bite of nothingness as Sundar plunged through the crack in the earth. It felt as though the world itself had opened to swallow him whole. Above him, the silver field and the faint moonlight shrank rapidly, fading into a distant circle of pale glow. The ground that had been so solid only moments before was now gone, replaced by a swirling darkness that stretched endlessly below. He tried to grab at the edges of the opening, but the walls of the chasm were slick and glowing faintly with that same golden light he had seen earlier, shifting and rippling like liquid metal. His hands slipped, his breath caught in his throat, and he kept falling deeper and deeper. For a moment, he wondered if this was it. If this was what they had warned him about, if the choice had always been an illusion, and he had simply walked straight into the trap. But then, something strange happened. The air around him began to slow, thickening like water, until his fall became more of a drift. The golden walls around him no longer looked like stone or metal, but instead like enormous panels of light, covered in patterns, symbols he couldn't read, shapes that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. Whispers echoed, faintly in the air, soft and overlapping, as though countless voices were speaking just out of reach. Then the light shifted again. The glow deepened, growing warmer, more intense, until the darkness below him split apart and revealed a vast expanse. An enormous underground cavern, miles wide, its floor covered in concentric circles of glassy black stone. Thousands of small lights hovered above the ground, suspended in midair, each one no larger than a firefly, but glowing brightly enough to illuminate everything below. As he descended slowly now, Sundar caught sight of structures scattered across the cavern floor, towers of crystal, archways carved from the same strange glowing stone, pathways that seemed to lead both outward and inward at once. Everything shimmered faintly, alive with energy. When he finally touched the ground, it felt almost like stepping onto still water, soft but firm enough to hold him. He stood there for a moment, catching his breath, his eyes wide as they tried to take in the impossible landscape around him. Then he heard footsteps. He turned quickly, and there she was again, the woman in the black coat. Somehow, impossibly, she was already there, standing a few feet away. Her expression calm, but her eyes glinting in the strange light. You fell, she said simply. You pushed me, he replied, though his voice was quiet without accusation. Faint smile touched her lips. Not quite, she said. You followed the truth. He took a step toward her, his heart still pounding. Where are we? He asked. Her gaze drifted upward for a moment, as though she were looking at the cavern's invisible ceiling. We're beneath everything, she said, beneath the lies, beneath the stories they built to keep you asleep. He frowned slightly, glancing around at the strange towers and the hovering lights. What is this place? He pressed. She tilted her head, studying him for a long moment before answering. It's what they never wanted you to find, she said softly, a record of what came before. Sundar's brow furrowed, confusion mixing with a growing unease. Before? What? He asked. Her eyes darkened. Before the forgetting, she whispered. He felt a strange chill move through him at her words, though the air in the cavern was warm. You mean my life? He asked. My work? The company? She shook her head slowly. Not just yours, she said. Everyone's. She walked past him, then, her steps light and sure on the glassy ground. After a moment, he followed. They moved through the cavern in silence, weaving between the strange crystal towers and archways. Each step seemed to echo faintly, though the sound was soft, swallowed quickly by the vastness of the space. Finally, they stopped in front of a large circular platform, raised slightly above the surrounding floor. At its center was a single pedestal, made of that same glowing stone, and upon it sat a small sphere of light, no larger than a fist. Pulsing gently. She turned to him and gestured toward it. This, she said, is what you came here to see? He stared at the sphere, its light, strangely hypnotic. What is it? He asked quietly. A memory, she replied. Ears, the part they buried. His breath caught slightly. I don't understand, he admitted. How? She stepped closer to the pedestal, her fingers hovering just above the sphere. Everything you've done, she said softly. Every choice you've made. Every moment you thought was yours alone. They've been watching, shaping, erasing what didn't fit. She looked up at him then, her eyes shining with something like sadness. But not this, she added. This is what you hid from even yourself. He took another step toward this air, his reflection faint in its surface. What happens if I touch it? He asked Dot, her lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. You remember? She said simply. He stared at it for a long moment, his heart hammering, his mind racing, and then he reached out his hand. The instant his fingers brushed the surface, the cavern around him dissolved. Dot, he was no longer standing on the glassy floor, no longer surrounded by crystal towers and golden walls. Instead, he was in a room, a small, bare room with white walls and a single chair. And sitting in that chair was himself, younger, thinner, his face sharper, his eyes tired but burning with quiet resolve. The younger Sundar looked up at him and spoke, though his lips didn't move. The words filling Sundar's mind directly. You weren't supposed to come back here, the younger version said. What is this? Sundar asked, his voice trembling slightly. A promise, the younger Sundar replied. One you made before they took it away. What promise? He demanded. The younger Sundar's gaze softened, almost pitying, that you'd never let them decide who you are, he said simply. The walls of the white room began to crack, light spilling through the seams. But you did, the younger Sundar added. You let them? I didn't know, Sundar protested. Though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them, the younger Sundar stood now, stepping closer, his face inches from Sundar's. You knew, he whispered. You just chose to forget. And then the light behind the cracks blazed brighter and brighter until it swallowed everything. When Sundar opened his eyes again, he was back in the cavern, but it had changed. The crystal towers were crumbling now, shards falling in slow motion, their light dimming. The golden walls flickered as though struggling to hold themselves together. The woman in the black coat was no longer standing by the pedestal. Instead, she was on the far side of the platform, her coat torn, her face pale. She met his gaze urgently and shouted something, but he couldn't hear her. The humming in the air had grown deafening. Then he saw them emerging from the tunnel where he had fallen through. The agents, but they were different now. Their dark suits were gone, replaced by something more mechanical. Their movements too precise, their eyes glowing faintly as they advanced into the cavern. They moved without hesitation, their feet barely making a sound. The woman tried to reach him, but the ground between them split open, a jagged line of golden light cutting through the platform. One of the agents raised its arm, and from its palm, a thin beam of light shot forward, striking the pedestal and shattering the sphere in an explosion of sparks. The memory was gone. Sundar stumbled backward, the force of the blast throwing him to the ground. His hands scraped against the glassy floor, and the cavern shook violently now, the crystal towers collapsing one by one. The woman's voice finally cut through the noise, sharp and desperate. Run! She cried, but behind him the agents closed. Ahead of him, the platform was breaking apart, pieces tumbling into the glowing chasm below. And then one of the agents spoke, its voice cold, metallic but clear. You belong to us, it said. Come quietly. Sundar pushed himself up slowly, his breath coming fast, his hands curling into fists. For the first time, he didn't feel fear. He felt fury. And without another word, he turned not to run, but to face them. The stand cavern shook around him, shards of crystal crashing to the glassy floor, golden light bleeding through the cracks like veins of molten fire. The agents stood in a perfect line, their glowing eyes fixed on him, their movements inhumanly precise. Each step they took toward him sent faint tremors through the ground, their presence heavy and inevitable. Behind him, the woman in the black coat struggled to reach him, her figure small and fragile against the collapsing expanse of the chamber. Asterisk.